Okay, welcome back. It's the middle of the week, the first day of August, and I told you we'd make it. We're going to talk to Webster Tarpley this hour, as we do once a month, sometimes more often than that. By the way, Webster has been doing a marvelous job of offering analysis and research into the outrageous war on Syria and what's going on there. He is a frequent contributor in a video sense to RT. I've got several of those posted on my site, and two of them went up this morning, in fact. 2 video appearances by Webster are up there in the first couple of blocks, I believe. Webster, are you there?
Jeff, let me point out, it's not RT anymore, it's Press TV.
Beg your pardon. Thank you. Got it.
RT doesn't have time for me. RT is doing puff pieces on Assange. Yeah. They're doing puff pieces on Ron Paul. They've got this British reactionary racist Nigel Farage of the UK Independence Party. They've got, who else did they have? Oh, this past weekend they had our dear friend Bill Ayers on there.
You're kidding. They had Ayers on RT?
Of course, sure. They did a 10-minute interview with old Bill Ayers. Geez. So
right.
What you seem to have there is an inability to distinguish between an authentic opposition in this country and a controlled opposition, an opposition which is actually run by Wall Street, the intelligence community, and the rest of it, right? Assange, of course, the great CIA limited hangout practitioner, right, who even when he had his program on RT, he was trying to use his program on RT to foment the Arab Spring, the color revolutions. He tried to bait Sheikh Nasrallah of Hezbollah in Lebanon. You know, why aren't you supporting the attack on Syria? I mean, this was wild stuff. And he also, if you look at what Assange was doing, he was actually inciting color revolution in Moscow. If he could,
he's working. He's
we
working
just heard
for
in
the
this
man.
Interesting news broadcast that the Ecuadorians are so far not in a hurry to give him asylum.
Not
I wouldn't
until
give
after
him
the
asylum.
Olympics. Well, they're going to make their
that sets up
soon.
Ecuador for a lot of grief. He is too slimy, too fishy, too compromised with all of these, U.S. and other intelligence networks. You certainly couldn't simply invite him into your country. I think that would be a mistake, right? He deserves to be seen for what he is, which is a deployment of the NATO-based intelligence community.
A deployment.
They know the Australian secret intelligence organization is playing the big role. Well,
both Press TV video clips with Webster are in the 6th news block at Rense.com. Press TV, the last holdout in the entire area. Forget Al Jazeera. I mean, Press TV is doing the job now.
Yeah, and of course RT has some things to recommend it, but when you look at their programming, you see that they're spending a lot of time on these fakery operations.
Correct.
Right?
Thumbs up. Now we're going to talk about Mitt Romney first. Romney.
Well, why don't we do Syria and Saudi Arabia first, if you want
Fine.
to? Right? If we
sure.
sort of divide the program more or less in half.
Go to it.
Look, what I'm trying to show with those appearances that you're kind enough to mention on Press TV and elsewhere is that we've just had this month of very acute conflict in Syria, and exactly where this has left us, I'm not sure. But certainly there was an attempt on and about the 18th of July, right, that Wednesday, to have what I think NATO has called Operation Damascus Volcano, which was a convergence of a number of attacks that were supposed to create panic and chaos, confusion, massacres, attempted coups by different cliques of officers, and so forth. And it went like this. We had been calling attention over the past months, and I think here too, to this video warfare, video fakery that was being prepared with the help of Ben Rhodes in the Obama White House, with Prince Bandar, with the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, with the people in Qatar and so forth. And the idea was that they were going to take over the Arabsat and Nilesat satellites. They would kick off the loyal Syrian programs, the Syrian state television, the Al Dunya, the Sham television, and put on fake versions, simulacra of those, cleverly or less cleverly engineered lookalikes, right, to try to convince people that Assad was fleeing and that resistance was futile and you better capitulate to NATO. And they did all that. That was all done during the week of July 18th. These satellites did kick off the loyal Syrian programming. They did broadcast that Assad was fleeing. They tried all of that. It's just that I think in this case we had succeeded in inoculating Syrian and world public opinion about what was coming. And in Syria they did it quite vigorously. They were broadcasting public service announcements on all of those television stations that I just mentioned, saying, at the drop of a hat here, people, we may be thrown off the air and replaced by a fake program, and you've got to be aware of that, and you don't believe what they put on, and so forth. So that was one thing. The other thing then was, of course, this big assassination, a big terror attack on one of the main government buildings, killing the defense minister, who was at the same time the most prominent Christian in the government. Very interesting. A bunch of generals, Assad's brother-in-law, who was also an intelligence official, Turkmani, the crisis management director, Shaukat.
It was an attempted decapitation.
That was the attempted decapitation, and I think partly because Assad was not in the room. Assad was not hit by this. It certainly facilitated matters that Assad was not among the victims. He was able to simply, make new appointments. He also purged a couple of generals, and I'm not sure what has happened with that. But it may be that they've discovered generals that were primed by NATO to try to assert control in a kind of a coup, right? If and when this decapitation had occurred. So the point is the decapitation really didn't work. The video fakery failed. The decapitation failed. There was an attack on the currency. They tried to create economic and financial chaos. They had the U.S. had attempted to cut all logistical and communications ties between Syria and Iran. That had been done by leaning on the Maliki government in Iraq to prevent overflights. They had been leaning on the government of Egypt to prevent Iranian ships from going through the Suez Canal. So there was a series of things
they've dug very deeply into their bag of dirty, foul, deadly tricks.
The other thing, I guess, also extremely important is that a new strategic echelon, a new wave of crazed patsies were thrown into the mix. That is to say, the first wave had been deployed, it looks to me, between, basically last winter, the winter of 11 to 12, but now they found that this was not enough. They had not succeeded in taking any territory and holding it, and therefore they went back to North Africa, the Middle East, all the way out to Pakistan, all the way into Central Asia, looking for criminal elements, convicts, fanatics, psychotics, all of them mercenaries, without exception. Killers, sure. And you can find such people. Now, the pool is not unlimited, and it seems to me a lot of them have been eliminated as a result of what they did, because it's a little bit, if you think about the Tet Offensive as it really was, rather than as some people might have thought it was, but these groups of the death squads, in effect, right, under NATO command in a kind of a loose way, seized downtown Damascus and downtown Aleppo, and then, of course, they were left there as sitting ducks, and they were unable to hold on. Certainly in Damascus, they didn't last very long. Now, what's going on in Aleppo right now, I find rather opaque, because the Western versions are completely unreliable. We just had, maybe you saw it, the Kronen Zeitung of Vienna, 1 million copies, biggest in Austria, and they had a big photograph. It was completely photoshopped. The guy and his baby, walking along a street in the city, and they took the background and made it into essentially a rubble field, right? A destroyed apartment house. So the fakery goes on and on and on. So what we're left with is that the attempt was made in the middle of July to have Operation Damascus Volcano, and that didn't work. Now, a lot of those crazed patsies, however, are still on the scene, and we just had last night on NBC News, they were salivating because they said the rebels had finally gotten Stinger missiles, right, handheld surface-to-air missiles, right? The kind that were so important in Afghanistan. So they were basically celebrating that. But so far today, that doesn't seem to have materialized. But we have to stay tuned.
Indeed. Let's take a break. We'll come right back with Webster. So the blood keeps flowing in Syria, and the West is behind the majority of it. Be right back in a minute. Okay, back with Webster, talking about Syria and other things as well. It's a very ugly, dark, macabre, brutal, evil chapter in American history, what we're doing in the Middle East, what we did to Libya, what we did to Iraq, of course, what we're doing in Afghanistan.
Regime. We didn't do anything.
Thank you. Go ahead.
No, it's important, right? There's no collective guilt. The guilt goes to the people who actually do these things, and not to
by our silence, we allow, as a populace, we are responsible.
Don't be silent then. You're not silent. I'm not silent.
That's the point.
So we're covered. But now, here's the thing. What this situation is now, it seems to me you've still got the presence of a lot of these crazies, and it's going to take a while to deal with them. And that's the optimistic hypothesis. And there is help coming in from other places, right? Presumably from Iran, from Hezbollah, some assistance from Russia in different forms.
We have a lot of special forces from both sides. They're obviously involved to some degree, and I'm wondering where we have to go with this conversation, Webster, in my view, is what will Russia ultimately put on the line to stop this? And if they don't, what does it mean to them on the international stage?
Let's look a little bit more broadly now, because up to now, this entire discussion is on the defensive. Now, we know that in politics, as in warfare, there is no greater misery than to be completely on the defensive, right? It's not a winning strategy. Sometimes you have to do it, and we often have to do it, and you have to do it well, and learn to like it when you have to do it. But there's also the question of the offensive, and what might that be? The incongruousness of the Arab Spring as it's played out, right, as a subversion strategy by the U.S., the British, the Israelis, NATO, and so forth, is that you're trying to overthrow all of the governments that look anything like Nasser, even the most distant resemblance to Nasserism, right? Arab socialism, Nasserism, nationalism, military governments, modernizing governments, secular governments, even Ahmadinejad qualifies, I think, quite clearly in this regard as a nationalist, as a modernizer, as a military man, right? With of course strong religious elements, and he's not the only one. There are some of the others have things like that too, right? So therefore, they had to attack Ben Ali, they had to attack Gaddafi and Mubarak, and now Assad, and they did Yemen, and they're trying to do Sudan now. They want to get rid of General Bashir. The IMF has played a big role in all of this to soften them up and to weaken them. But now look, who's supporting all of this, right? Who controls the Arab League? Who are the indispensable pillars of this whole operation? Well, it is a collection of the most backward governments in the world. Feudal, reactionary, medieval, absolute monarchies. I mean, unspeakable monstrosities, relics of barbarism in the modern world. Let's start with Saudi Arabia. Let's go on to Qatar, right, where wonderful Al Jazeera comes from, right? That place is a zoo of medieval elements. The United Arab Emirates. Let's not forget Kuwait, right? The Emir of Kuwait, reinstalled by the U.S., right?
One of the most ruthless, of course, Bahrain.
Absolutely. All of these places have slavery. In Saudi Arabia, slavery was theoretically abolished in 1965, but in practice it has never been abolished. And we know here in Washington, over the years, since the first Gulf War, you look in the Washington Post, and every year or two, you'll see some diplomat from some Gulf state who has made the mistake of bringing his private household slave to the United States as a housekeeper, as a valet, as some kind of a servant, and then this person decides they don't want to be a slave anymore, and they appeal for the protection of the laws of the United States, and they often get it. So don't forget Bahrain, of course, as you mentioned. There's also Oman, Sultan Qaboos, last but not least,
Sultan Qaboos?
Qaboos, yeah,
That's
Qaboos.
a great name. Great name.
That's him. Then you've got King Abdullah of Jordan, the Jordanians, the so-called Hashemite monarchy. Then you've got the King of Morocco, right? They all claim to be direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, but the one in Morocco has, I guess he's got a colorable claim compared to some of the others. So you've got that list, right? What is it? 7 or 8 different monarchies. This is the basis of the U.S., NATO, Israeli, Western position in the Middle East. And I point to this because this is now an area where everybody can contribute, right? The so-called revolutions of the Arab Spring were never that. They're fakes. There's nothing revolutionary been accomplished so far, right? A revolution means to overthrow a monarchy, to abolish slavery, to impose a land reform, right, where you break up a land and you provide, land for landless peasants, or it can be profound economic reform, something like the New Deal. By this count, here in the United States, we've had 3. We had the American Revolution to get rid of the monarchy. We had the Civil War to abolish slavery and have a land reform in the form of the Homestead Act. And then we had the New Deal, right, to cut down the power of Wall Street and enable the trade union movement. The Russian Revolution was a real revolution. The French was real. The Chinese was real. But none of these Arab ones are real. But the ones that I've just mentioned, if they come, those would be real, because they would overthrow these feudal monarchies.
All right. We're going to go right through the break. There's a lot to talk about, so keep going.
All right. So this is where we are now. Now, you look at this. Everybody knows Bahrain had an upsurge about a year and a half ago, right? And the Saudis sent in their army.
Saudis were right in it. Right in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, Al Jazeera was remarkably restrained. They were the indignation at Al Jazeera was definitely kept within limits when this occurred. So what you now have, though, is the famous eastern province of Saudi Arabia, right? It is the Shiites. These are oppressed people, for sure. And their rebellion takes, forms that, are often unpredictable. But mainly, there's a cleric called Nimr, N-I-M-R, sometimes N-E-M-R. Right? This is the peculiarity of Arabic coming into the Roman alphabet. But he's now been arrested by the Saudis, so we've had an upsurge in a city called Qatif, Q-A-T-I-F, and in some other places in this eastern province. The eastern province is where the oil is, where the Shiites are. Bahrain is not far away, right? That's on the eastern edge of Saudi Arabia, so you get the idea.
Yeah.
So all of this could become an event to transform the world, and also to break this dynamic that we see in Syria, right, where the NATO powers just keep trying and trying and trying, and they send in more and more of these patsy types, and of course the patsies exact a terrible toll in the civilian population. At the same time, many of the patsies don't make it, right, when they go on these killing sprees. But now there's something else happening, and I think it's important to focus on Bahrain and this eastern province of Saudi Arabia. These are things that could lead to actual revolution, because they'd be overthrowing these monarchical dynasties, and they would be, for example, these are absolute monarchies. I mean, you have to think what that means. An absolute monarchy has not been seen in Europe since the Russian Revolution, if you want to count that, right? The House of Romanov, they claimed to be absolute and autocratic. Now, there were limits, right? There were all kinds of limits to what they did, but absolutism, right? The French have not had that, since, really since the French Revolution, because the restored monarchies after Napoleon were not really absolute. In Britain, you haven't had it since you haven't even had the pretense of it since 1688. So you're talking about institutions.
That's a Battle of Hastings, isn't it?
No. The Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution. The kicking out of the Stuart dynasty by the Parliament.
That's what it was.
And bringing in William and Mary as creatures of Parliament, so that they were limited, right? They and the Bill of Rights, right? The English Bill of Rights of 1688. a Bill of Rights for oligarchs, not for you.
That's what it was, all right.
But for the Whigs, the great Whig aristocrats. But you get the idea. There haven't been any real revolutions. Now, I would also assume that land reforms might be possible in some of these places. There would undoubtedly be the question of the property of the royal house to be carved up and divided, right? The confiscation of, in particular, the Saudi monarchy is very oppressive because it's so numerous, right? It comes out of a harem, and therefore you have different mothers, right? Different mothers and princesses, right? Queens, if you will. And each one of them wants to become the queen mother of the next king, right? So this is, a stage set for intrigue. And the dominant clan for the past 30 years has been these so-called Sudaries. Sudaries because they're all daughters of a woman whose name is got to do with the Sudari label. And that's still what's in power. Now, in this context, though, we have to also look at the fate of Prince Bandar.
The new Saudi intelligence chief.
He was just named during the week of the attack on Syria. He was named the new boss of the Saudi equivalent of the CIA.
And the explosion that greeted that almost immediately thereafter was thought to be potentially a reprisal from
4 days after the bomb in Syria, there was a bomb at the Saudi intelligence building, which, according to official news reports, killed not Bandar but his deputy. But then we have one source in the world, which is Réseau Voltaire, right, the Voltaire network of Thierry Meyssan, who is often well informed, although in these matters nobody can be completely infallible. And Meyssan put out the story that Bandar had also succumbed to this same bomb, I believe, and that
any confirmation?
No. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole thing is still up in the air. The Saudi government neither confirms nor denies, but that's what they always do. They're never going to confirm or deny until they're ready to do it. So we're left wondering what happened to Bandar. Now, the importance of Bandar is this: this is the main political operative of this entire degenerate monarchy. In other words, these people are not capable of political operations. I mean, one story that I remember hearing from people who had seen it happen. Had been in Saudi Arabia, this is in Europe in the 80s. King Fahd, when King Fahd was on the throne, he had everything set up so that he could gamble around the clock. He had a throne, which, was connected with television monitors to croupiers and blackjack tables and, whatever, roulette wheels all around the world, right? In Macau, in Monte Carlo, in Atlantic City, in Las Vegas, and so forth, right? All around the world, around the clock. He wanted to gamble. He was a compulsive gambler. And, you could get all kinds of interesting dossiers from, different embassies here about how degenerate the Saudis were. Now, Bandar is an exception. Bandar had been to a British military academy. He'd been the ambassador here in Washington for, I think, 22 years, from 1983 until 2005. He became Bandar Bush. He became adopted into the Bush family. He was with them on 9/11. Of course, he's then been touched up by scandals, right? BAE was involved. He was involved in kickbacks with them. But now he's reported eliminated, and just nobody knows. But the idea is, I would also, let me hasten to add, it's not automatic that this was simply a retaliation by Syria. It could well be that. It could well be that the Syrian government said, turnabout is fair play. Retaliation is always, the essence of international relations, right? Once things go astray. So that's possible. But another possibility is that maybe the U.S. Was not interested in seeing him survive either, because you have to remember that he was a completely cynical operative who had, despite his 22 years in Washington, he had no sentimental attachment to the U.S. as far as I could see. He was ready to dump the U.S. at a moment's notice. Once he thought that Russia and China, if he thought that Russia and China were a better deal, and he was distinguished because he was setting up this option for Saudi Arabia with Pakistan, that he would have Pakistani nuclear protection, he'd have the Pakistani nuclear umbrella extended over Saudi Arabia, and he would also have 1 or 2 divisions of Pakistani troops, if he needed them, to put down a rebellion in the kingdom, right, in the eastern provinces, right? And you have to remember there's a history of Pakistani troops being used in the Middle East, right? Like if you think of the Black September in 1970 in Jordan, there were Pakistani forces took part in that, right? Actually under command of General Zia. That's how Zia got to be the head of, or one of the ways he got to be the head of Pakistan. Anyway, what does this leave us with? The idea is that there's some kind of a mass upheaval going on in Saudi Arabia. It continues to go on in Bahrain. And I think what we can do from here is that we really want to put as much world attention as we can on the plight of these countries, because these are places that are really ripe for revolution, and they really deserve international assistance. And of course, these are precisely the ones that the National Endowment for Democracy and Gene Sharp and the Albert Einstein Institute, right, and you know all these people, they're not going to lift a finger. Atpor is not going to help you in Saudi Arabia, right? You're not going to get any money from the CIA.
Not a chance.
The State Department won't help you. If you're in Russia, you can be a neo-Nazi, a neo-Bolshevik. You're going to be a democratic force as long as you're anti-Putin. But if you're in Saudi Arabia, you can forget it. So that leaves it to us, sort of civil society and public opinion in the Western world. Jeff, I would urge you, right, with that influential website, right, set your Google alerts on Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Jordan, Morocco, right? And let's try to see what's happening there. The other thing that anybody can do, and I urge people to do it, is the Twitter army, right? There are now competing Twitter armies. If you listen to Hannity, this reactionary on the radio, and he wants to have a Twitter army to kick out Obama and bring in Romney. Well, no, we're not interested in that. But what we would be interested in is a Twitter army who try to promote real revolutions where they're needed, right? In other words, these monstrous feudal barbaric relics, right? These monarchies. The House of Saud. The House of Saud.
That's worth a chuckle.
Yeah, but look, that's how they started. If you remember this movie, right, the famous Lawrence of Arabia movie.
Well, this goes back to the Wahhabis, doesn't it?
Yeah, but look, I'm just trying to say, the Saudis that's how they started. They were the irregular forces of the British Empire, right? When General Allenby was advancing from Cairo to Jerusalem to Damascus, right, against the Turks, against the Ottoman Empire, he had his army along the coast, but then he had this right flank, right, as he was going north. And there's a famous scene, you've seen it, where he says to Lawrence of Arabia, "Who's going to cover my right flank?" And Lawrence of Arabia says, "I will do that with these tribes from Saudi Arabia." And among them is the guy who then becomes King Abdulaziz, I guess, the founder of the modern House of Saud. So that's where they started, right? They are the irregulars of the British Empire. So I think they deserve every attention, right, and every conceivable support. And on Twitter, right? If you don't know what to, it's very easy to get on Twitter. I did it in just a few minutes, right? That means anybody can do it. If you don't know what to put out, go to Webster G. Tarpley and retweet what I have, right? You can find some others, right? But start from what I'm doing. That will soon lead you to other places. Go look on Saudi Arabia, go look on Bahrain, and all the things you'll find there. And you'll find links to other websites, right? You can tell pretty easily whether they're pro-CIA or actually, the real revolutionaries, the real thing. You can follow them. You can follow those links and, begin to discover all sorts of interesting things. And the main thing we're looking for right now is websites that represent the anti-regime forces in that list of feudal monarchies that I just went through, right? All from Morocco all the way to Jordan with the Gulf and everybody in between.
All right,
so there's something that everybody can do. And this will also, as I say, this will help to relieve the pressure on Syria. It's something we can actually do to try to
help,
point this whole thing in a somewhat more positive direction.
All right, very good. We'll take a break and come back and talk about Romney and his somewhat less than triumphant foreign tour, shall we say, in just a minute with Webster as we continue. Okay, the presumptive candidate of the Republican Party, the man who's going to knock off Barkey, Mittens Romney, on his, hyped foreign tour, condemned Russia as a, quote, country where the desire to be free is met with brutal oppression during a speech on the last leg of an error-strewn international tour. Addressing a public conference at Warsaw University in Poland, the Republican presidential candidate poured praise on the Polish struggle for liberty and how the former communist bloc country honors freedom. Unfortunately, there are parts of the world today where the desire to be free is met with brutal oppression, said Mittens. Do we puke now or later?
Well, this is now the problem, right? And I think it is important for everybody to be thoroughly educated about the horrors of Romney. And I think to fall into a what can I say, a Pavlovian reaction where
that's what it is.
You think you know everything, and Obama's the only evil in town. That's very, very naive, right? And I can see some people unfortunately doing that. So you gotta fixate for a moment now the full horrors of Romney, and that's more or less what you saw. His love-in with Netanyahu indicates, if anything, a greater subservience and a greater adventurism than what we've seen under Obama. I mean,
no
we
question.
have to thank our lucky stars. Yeah. There has been real personal friction over very, very narrow, invidious issues between Obama and Netanyahu. I mean, that's been real. Unfortunately, it doesn't go anywhere near far enough, right? It's basically symbolic from our point of view. But in the case of Romney, this is a bosom buddy of Bibi, and that's been so since 1976, since they both worked together in adjoining cubicles at the Boston Consulting Group, right? And we know that Bibi has given Mitt advice about politics. Mitt has given Bibi advice about finance, and there you have it. So that's what we saw, right? The attempt to choreograph this wonderful meeting of these two old friends. Netanyahu saying, "I couldn't agree with you more, Mitt." This is a degree of cordiality that we haven't seen with Obama. Now, at the same time, some pretty horrible things were happening. Right, this guy Dan Senior, you'll remember him. He was the spokesman for the unspeakable, which was the U.S. occupation of Iraq during the Jerry Bremer era. Right, when we had Jerry Bremer as the proconsul. Right, this absolute incompetent cretin. He's the one who decided to break up the Iraq army, right, to dissolve the Iraqi state. He's the one who opened the door wide to the civil war that followed, right, basically made it inevitable.
Wonder what he's doing now.
Well, I don't know. He'll probably be joining the Romney campaign. I'm sure
he already has. Most everybody else has.
Yeah, well, Senor, right, when you see Senor, you're looking back to the worst of Bush-Cheney, and it's not just him. Senor comes out at the same time saying what Mitt is talking to Bibi about is that if Bibi decides that Israel has to attack Iran, Romney wants to respect that decision. And this implies, of course, that he's going to support it. Now, this is obviously wrong, even at the level of just simple political egotism, right, which you'd think these people would be capable of. You don't want to encourage Netanyahu to attack Iran because it's bad for the U.S. and it's bad for Obama from the sort of demagogic point of view. But no, with Romney, it's going to be essentially we're going to farm out the entire U.S. foreign policy to Netanyahu more than you've seen so far. So whatever you've seen so far is obviously bad enough, but it's going to go beyond this. And on the U.S. side, you'll have a foreign policy which is largely determined by these crazy neocons, right? We mentioned Dan Senior. We should remember Robert Joseph, Joseph was the guy who put the stuff about the Niger yellow cake, the big lie, right? What Joe Wilson went to Africa and debunked, right?
Right.
The Upper Volta, I guess it was.
Mm-hmm.
No, Niger, sorry. The Niger yellow cake story, right? And the whole thing with Valerie Plame came out of this.
Yeah. These are career
Robert Joseph.
creeps.
Then we have Elliot Cohen, professor at Hopkins, International Affairs. Then you've got Bolton, right, the great hater of the United Nations.
John Bolton.
With the big mustache. You've got
he's a nut. That guy.
Yeah, a lot of them are mentally on the brink. And then we've got Robert Kagan of the famous family, right? His brother is the other Kagan. The brother is the one at the American Enterprise Institute who designed the surge for General Petraeus. Field Marshal Kagan, I've always called him. But this is Robert Kagan at the Brookings Institution. So you're going to have a very, very narrow foreign policy base, which is neocons. And then to go with that, you're going to have a very narrow domestic and economic team, which is Mormons. And let's just go through it, right? Romney, of course, his family has been in the top leadership of the Mormon Church for 7 generations, I think the count is. If you have Rubio as vice president, he was trained as a Mormon for 10 years in his youth. So he looks like a crypto
I didn't know
Mormon.
that.
Yeah.
10 years.
10 years. 10 years as a Mormon.
Uh-huh.
Formative years, too. They might have told him, why don't you become a Catholic? It's going to be better, or whatever he is. I don't know what he is. But, be something that looks more like, your constituency there in Florida.
Yeah, they did float the Condi Rice name out for a day or two.
Yeah, and they still say, and I'm not sure who it is. I just said, if it's Rubio, then it's going to be the Mormon. It's a Mormon yoke you'll be able to see, right? And again, the line coming from the U.S. is Syria is bad because there are too many Alawites in the government. The answer to that over here is going to be it's going to be a government where if you're not a Mormon, you can forget it, right? If you're not an LDS, Latter-day Saint. And then I have to mention the fact that Romney, of course, has already named his transition team director, who is this guy, former Governor Mike Leavitt of Utah, another Mormon, and this is also a multi-generational Mormon family. Remember the Mountain Meadows Massacre of 1857?
No.
This is where Brigham Young, the church was founded by Joseph Smith in the 1830s. By 1844, with the assassination of Joseph Smith, it passed into there was a power struggle, but then Brigham Young, the guy who led the Mormons out to Salt Lake City, a hardened traitor, a racist, a misogynist. I mean, we'll have a lot to say about him, too. They named their university after this guy. But all of this going on, right? Brigham Young, in 1857, ordered the secession of Utah, that Utah was going to be an independent country, not part of the United States. It was going to be very big. It was going to be the whole territory between the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada, right? This was the state of Deseret. This was going to be a satellite of the British Empire to break up the United States, right? It's part of the same strategy that saw the Confederate States of America being backed by Lord Palmerston, Lord Russell, and other British diplomats and other British operatives. But in the middle of all that, Brigham Young put out this decree saying, no more settlers, right? No more pioneers. No more wagon trains. Can't come through here. Forget the Oregon Trail. Forget the Santa Fe Trail. Forget the Overland Trail. Forget the Mormon Trail. Forget all of it. We're blocking you, right? And don't think that you'll be able to send your transcontinental railroad through here. And he did allow the telegraph to go through, but then he tapped it. He tapped everything that went through. So if the president in Washington was sending something to the governor of California, Brigham Young was tapping into these secret communications. Anyway, Brigham Young ordered the massacre of 140 pioneers, right?
120 men, women, and children.
Yeah.
Let the children under the age of 7 survive.
Yeah, the ones who were considered to be too young to tell the story.
That's right.
Because the idea was the Mormons wanted to blame it on Indians. It was not Indians. It was Mormons.
And the only reason the annihilation order was given because the Mormons thought that they had been bagged as being white. They didn't want that word out there. Their Indian cover was blown.
Yeah, it's more complicated than this because it's an attempt to to block the path of these pioneers.
They were from Arkansas, most of the immigrants.
Yeah, it's called the Fancher Party.
Right. And
it's a group of 7 or 8 Arkansas families. Very interesting, and I'm sure it'll be interesting for people in Arkansas to be reminded of this. This guy, Governor Levitt former Governor Levitt of Utah, who is now the transition team director for Romney, he's the one passing out all the plum jobs in the plum book. He is a direct lineal descendant of another Levitt who was part of the death squad that killed these 120 or 140 people from
sure.
Arkansas. And he's also done what he could to cover up for his deceased precursor back there.
They left all the bodies out for the animals to ravage, so there would be nothing left. No graveyard.
Right. And this is the time, very interesting fact, the first time a president of the United States ever said the word terrorism was President James Buchanan, not a good guy, but still, this is what he said, when he got the word of Brigham Young declaring the independence of this Deseret, or Utah Territory, or whatever Brigham Young, was calling it at the time. There's a proclamation from President Buchanan where he says, "This is a strange system of terrorism that the Mormons have imposed in these lands." That's the first time an American president ever said terrorism, and it applied to Mormons. So I think Romney actually, he says, "I love my faith, I love my faith." A lot of people are going to wonder, what's to love? Is this what you love? The Mountain Meadows Massacre? And this is only the beginning, right? I mean, it scratches the surface of what went on. So
that's an important historical event.
It is. Bishop Romney, he's a bishop, has a tradition. We should know about his tradition. Voters have a right to know.
All right, Webster, thank you. Excellent update as always.
Okay, and people want to watch Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net, and Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter. But on Tarpley.net, you want to find out more about the Mormons. There'll be ways to do that coming up soon. Coming up this month, before our next talk.
Thank you. Thanks, Webster.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Webster Tarpley, you can see his work on Press TV, and a couple of those videos are in our about 6th news block right now.